From the Nintendo Entertainment System onwards, there was one constant with Nintendo consoles, and that was, with each one came a new Mario game. Well, with almost all of them. Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground, and welcome to our retro review of Super Mario Advance. Now, Super Mario Advance might look a little bit familiar to you, and that's because, for the first time ever, a new Nintendo console didn't actually get a new Mario game. Instead, Super Mario Advance was the first in a series of games that took older Mario games, gave them an admittedly nice polish and spruce up, and just dropped them on the Game Boy Advance. And for the first installment, it bizarrely chose two games to put in the package that I really wouldn't have gone with: Super Mario Bros. 2 and Mario Bros. Now, first of all, Super Mario Bros. 2 was given a real fresh coat of paint. There was a fair few bits added to it, but effectively, it was still Super Mario Bros. 2. And Super Mario Bros. 2 had been released a long time earlier on the original NES, so the graphical improvements were very clear. However, we'd already seen a graphically improved version of this game on the SNES in the Super Mario All-Stars package. Granted, this game got a number of improvements and additions even over the Super Mario All-Stars version, but it was still pretty much that game. The other game we got was Mario Bros. Yes, not Super, just Mario Bros. The 1983 game that was released on the Atari 2600, the arcades, and of course the NES itself. This simple one-screen game is actually a lot of fun, but again, we'd also seen this released on Super Mario All-Stars on the SNES. Granted, this version of the game is substantially more visually appealing, but it's still just the same game. So, with all this said, let's take a look at what Super Mario Advance was really like. Well, I suppose the first thing to say is that the main game is undeniably the retread of Super Mario Bros. 2. Super Mario Bros. 2, for those that haven't already seen previous reviews, is quite an anomaly in the Super Mario Bros. Games, because it wasn't actually made to be a Super Mario Bros. Game. In a nutshell, following the release of the original Super Mario Bros., they were so desperate to get a new game out there to capitalise on its success that they basically remade the game, but much harder. That was later released as The Lost Levels, but that only released in Japan. For the rest of the world, they thought it would be a little bit too challenging. So, rather than not give them a game, they took a pre-existing game that was in the works called Doki Doki Panic, and with a few changes to characters, released it as Super Mario Bros. 2. And that's why this game is so different to the other Mario Bros. Games. You don't kill villains by jumping on their head, instead you just walk along with them, sitting on top of them, which is very strange for a Mario game. Instead, you have to pluck things out of the ground to throw at them, or you can jump on their head and pick them up to throw at other enemies. Even the layouts of the levels are quite different, but on the whole, it's still a visually impressive game, and for a lot of people it was still a lot of fun. Although I personally was never a massive fan of it, it was just a very different type of platform game. Now, all that said, the Super Mario All-Stars version of the game did make dramatic graphical improvements over the original, and again, the Super Mario Advance version of the game has done that again. First of all, one of the key observations is that there's a number of baddies and other characters and even environmental features that are suddenly much larger. You will see giant versions of characters walking around. You will be able to pluck out fruit that's huge as well. I don't really get the purpose of this, but it was definitely an addition to the game. We also had actual voice acting for the characters. Each of Mario, Toad, Princess Peach and Luigi, as well as some of the villains, have actual voice lines of dialogue thrown into the game, something we hadn't seen in any previous version of it. There's a few other tweaks and additions thrown around it, but Nothing that changes the game dramatically or improves anything about it. Not that I'm saying the game needed massive improvements, but I suppose in a nutshell, if you were a fan of Super Mario Bros. 2 and you got this game, you'd probably think it was the best version of it you'd ever played. If you weren't massively a fan of Super Mario Bros. 2, and I think it's fair to say that whilst a lot of people like it and rate it highly, it's probably the least popular of the Mario games. All you have to do is look at the game mechanics. You'd never see any of them again. Most of the characters that were in this game didn't really make many more appearances in future Mario games. So, whilst it may be relatively liked or even loved in some areas, it didn't really take many features going forward into new Mario games. In fact, the Super Mario Advance version of the game seems to do quite the opposite, and instead tries to find features from other Mario games to embed into this. For example, one of the items you can pluck out of the ground is a red Koopa shell, something we wouldn't see elsewhere in the game. It's like it's being added in there to make this feel more like an actual Mario game. But yes, as stated, if you like the original, you're gonna love this. If you didn't enjoy aspects of the original, none of the changes here are going to really make it feel any more fun for you. And then of course there's the Mario Brothers game. As much as Mario Brothers might have been a lot of fun at the time, it's certainly one of the weaker links in Mario's history. It's just not aged very well, and many of the qualities we love about Mario just aren't applicable within that either. It's ironic, in Super Mario Advance, rather than creating a new Mario game, they decided to lump together two of potentially the weaker Mario games into one cartridge. I'm not against them doing re-releases, but when, well prior to this, we had the Super Nintendo, and it had Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, 3, Lost Levels, and Mario Bros. On one cart, this doesn't feel particularly advanced to me. But that said, how was it viewed when it was first released? Well, I'm sure it got some decent scores, but 7 out of 10 is probably 8.5, 8, okay. Yeah. See, it seems this game was actually very, very well received. Whether that's because, compared to games we'd seen on handhelds previously, this was a massive, massive leap up, or whether it was simply because maybe Super Mario Bros. 2 was far more beloved than I ever really gave it credit for, but Super Mario Advance was actually very popular. It's also possible that potentially for a lot of gamers, this was their first time playing this game, so whilst it was a retread in gaming, it wasn't necessarily a retread for them. And maybe I'm underselling just how good those minor tweaks and improvements to the gameplay were. Often, those little changes can make a massive difference for people. In fact, the lowest score I found for the game anywhere was Next Gen, giving it 3 stars out of 5, which is still pretty good, and in fairness, I think the game is pretty good. I would certainly not say it's a bad game, but as for modern scrutiny, well, in general it seems that this game is more beloved now than it ever was before. And I have to say that playing this version of the game, which I hadn't done very much when it was first released, I generally consider it to be far more fun to play than any of the other versions of Super Mario Bros. 2. So again, those minor tweaks maybe make quite the difference. On the whole, I guess I just wasn't a big fan of the fact that the Game Boy Advance, one of the best consoles Nintendo had ever released, was so lazily just given a series of remakes for games. But maybe that's just me as someone who'd played all those games. For a lot of younger gamers, they were being reintroduced to absolute classics in a fresh and really fun way. And maybe that makes it worthwhile. I'd never been a massive fan of this game as a Mario game, but maybe that was the problem. Maybe I should always have just viewed it as a game in itself. So, If I try and do that, and especially this version of the game, I think it's fair to say 7 out of 10 is a decent score. I think a lot of the love that this game gets comes because of what a dramatic leap forward it was for Mario games on a handheld console. I'd certainly never say anyone was wrong for giving it a 9 out of 10, I also wouldn't think anyone would be wrong for giving it a 5 out of 10. I'd love to hear people's views, especially on this game, so please comment below your thoughts and let me know. And until next time, as always, take the high ground.